It's fairly straightforward because most people assume that if you've got pain or illness, you must have an organ disease or some kind of structural damage in your body. But it turns out there's a whole other category where the brain can produce pain or illness pretty much anywhere in your body. The list of symptoms goes into, over 100. But these are 100% real symptoms. There's nothing imaginary about them. They're not in your head. They're just as real as the symptoms in my other patients who do have organ disease or structural damage. And we call them neuroplastic because they're generated by nerves, by changes in nerve circuits in the brain. And they're plastic, which means it's actually a hopeful term. In medical jargon, it means capacity for change. So that if you have one of these conditions, even if you've had it for decades, even if it was severe enough to put you in the hospital, if you know what to look for, we can diagnose and treat it.
Welcome to Hopeful and Wholesome, the show where ambitious women come home to their bodies. I'm your host, Hope Pedraza, and I'm a functional practitioner, human design guide, and expert on all things energy, and your partner in decoding the language of your body. This is your space to reconnect with your body's wisdom, reclaim your energy, and rise into alignment in your health, your business, and your life. Because thriving isn't about pushing harder, it's about learning to listen deeper. So let's dive in because your next breakthrough starts right now. Hey y'all, welcome back to Hopeful and Wholesome. Today I have on the show Dr. David Clarke, and Dr. David is the president of the Association for Treatment of Neuroplastic Symptoms, which is a nonprofit dedicated to ending the chronic pain epidemic. He holds an MD from the University of Connecticut School of Medicine and is board certified in internal medicine and gastroenterology. His organization's mission is to advance the awareness, diagnosis, and treatment of stress-related brain-generated medical conditions. And that's what we're diving into today. We are talking about neuroplastic symptoms and how what's going on in your body isn't in your head, but it's in your brain. And some of this is going to blow your mind because if you've ever been told that it's in your head, it actually might be in your brain and not in your head. And Dr. David is going to talk about neuroplastic symptoms, what this looks like, what brain-generated symptoms are, how they differ from traditional pain and disease, and then what some of the most common neuroplastic symptoms are, how they can get triggered, and how we can work to treat these. And he has some really incredible testimonials and stories about people who have healed a lot of pretty crazy things just by the work that he's doing and understanding neuroplastic symptoms. So I encourage you to listen to this and send this to a friend. If you have someone in your life who is dealing with symptoms that they just can't get to the bottom of, this could be the thing that makes things click, that the thing that changes everything. So send this to a friend and let's jump in. All right, y'all. I'm here with Dr. David. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be with you, Hope. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. I'm excited about this conversation. I think that this um, is a topic that I feel like I haven't heard a lot about, which is obviously what we're going to talk about, but I think it's going to be really resonant for so many of the women listening. And I want to start by you just giving an explanation of what are neuroplastic symptoms.
Okay, well, it's fairly straightforward because most people assume that if you've got pain or illness, you must have an organ disease or some kind of structural damage in your body. But it turns out there's a whole other category where the brain can produce pain or illness pretty much anywhere in your body. The list of symptoms goes into, over 100. But these are 100% real symptoms. There's nothing imaginary about them. They're not in your head. They're just as real as the symptoms in my other patients who do have organ disease or structural damage. And we call them neuroplastic because they're generated by nerves, by changes in nerve circuits in the brain. And they're plastic, which means it's actually a hopeful term. In medical jargon, it means capacity for change. So that if you have one of these conditions, even if you've had it for decades, even if it was severe enough to put you in the hospital, if you know what to look for, we can diagnose and treat it successfully.
That's so interesting. So for someone who has these symptoms that you're saying, like it's not a structural thing, what might cause, I mean, I know this is probably a loaded question, but what might cause some of these things to some of these neuroplastic symptoms that aren't
Yeah,
structural?
it has to do with stress
Mm.
or emotions or challenges in life or trauma. And surprisingly, in many cases, people do not fully recognize the magnitude of what's going on. They may not recognize it at all. I mean,
Right.
one of my patients, when I went to see her, she'd been admitted the night before with an attack of severe dizziness and vomiting. And she said something to me I've never heard from any other patient, which was, "Thank you for coming, doctor, but don't waste your time with me. You'd be better off seeing your other patients." And when I asked her why, it turned out she had good reason because she'd been having these attacks 6 to 10 times every year for 15 years. And
Mm.
she lived near a major prestigious university hospital to which she had been admitted 60 times in
Wow.
those 15 years, saw a dozen so a psychiatrist, and had no diagnosis.
Right.
So, she just assumed she was a hopeless case and was in complete despair.
Right.
But by knowing what to look for, I uncovered the stress that was responsible for her condition. And in less than an hour, we had a successful treatment. She never had another attack. So these are, again, very real symptoms, and they can cause problems from everything from migraines to irritable bowel to long COVID to
Mm.
pelvic pain. Spine pain is a big one. And they can put you in the hospital at times. I've had patients with these things for decades.
Hmm.
But again, if you know what to look for, if you know the kinds of stresses, you can uncover those, help the person to bring those into conscious awareness, and then we can treat them. We can
Yeah.
help you get them better. One last point I should make is that a majority of my patients, the stress was actually coming from when they were children. It's what we call
Mm.
adverse childhood experiences or ACEs. It's pretty much anything that you would never want for a child of your own,
Right.
that would make you sad or angry if you saw it happening to a child you care about. And those can have long-term impacts well into your adult years. One of my patients was 87 years old. She was still suffering from something that happened to her when she was 8 years old.
That's crazy.
But it's all treatable. Once
Right.
you identify it, we can do a lot about it.
Right, right. And it's interesting that we've talked a little bit about the adverse childhood experience before because there's a lot of science around chronic disease, autoimmunity, things like that that have links to adverse childhood experiences. So I think it's safe to say like there's this is kind of along the same lines. But I want to make a point here because what you're saying is these neuroplastic symptoms are in your brain. This doesn't mean it's in your head like you're imagining. It's like actually in your brain.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
I want to ban that phrase in your head
Yes,
because it
yes.
is so misleading.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so I wanted to bring that forward because I think that's an important distinction. So when you're these patients you discover have these neuroplastic symptoms, what is the process of healing look like once you've pinpointed so is it first like you're pinpointing where the stress came from, like where in their life? Is it like a rewire? Like what does the process look like?
Yeah, obviously, first make sure there's no organ disease or structural damage. And about a third of my patients, that was the case. And then I'd start looking, I do what I call a stress evaluation. What's going on in your life right now, for example? And one of my patients, it was very simple, but none of his other doctors had asked him. And it turned out he was only having his pain when he was driving to work.
Wow, that's telltale
Yeah, right.
sign.
So you're diagnosing him already, right?
Right.
You just have to ask the right question. But other
Yeah.
people, it's more complicated, and
Yeah.
they might have depression that they don't recognize. They might have an anxiety disorder they don't recognize. The anxiety disorder tip-off is that people's symptoms are more severe or more frequent when they're away from what they consider a safe environment.
Right.
So I look for that, or I look for, that there's an anxiety trigger. One of my patients was having severe diarrhea, taking multiple tablets to stop her diarrhea on her bad days. But it turned out, and again, none of her other doctors knew to look for this, but it turned out that her bad days were on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting.
and on the weekends, she was
She was
fine.
fine. Yeah.
No symptoms,
Yeah.
didn't need any medication. So what was going on Tuesdays and Thursdays was she played varsity soccer. She was very anxious about her performance in the competition, and all the games were always on Tuesdays and Thursdays. If it
Mm.
happened that there wasn't a game and it was just practice, she'd be fine.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes total
So
sense. I've had so many clients before that, they're they have, various symptoms. Some of them are like mystery symptoms, some of them related to their, autoimmunity. But when they go on vacation, all of a sudden, no symptoms. Like,
Yeah,
huh,
isn't
imagine
that a
that.
giant clue?
Yeah.
Yes. One of my patients, 25 years of daily back pain. It was a man in his 70s.
Hmm.
Uh, every single day for all those years, except 2 weeks out of the year. And what was he doing on those 2 weeks out of the year?
Vacationing.
You
Wow.
know, just to make sure. I mean, I was thinking, okay, well, maybe he's resting his back on a warm
Sure.
beach
Yeah.
somewhere. But it turned out, no, he was fly fishing in British
Oh,
Columbia.
wow.
And so, very active vacation. And he tells me, just to clinch it, when he's done fishing for the day, he's helping the lodge owner clear brush from behind the
Oh,
lodge.
physical manual labor. And he's
Is he
still,
having any
yeah.
back pain when he's
Right.
doing this? Not a bit of it.
Wow.
So
That's
clearly
crazy.
not
Yeah.
structural back pain, but
Yeah.
every bit as bad, obviously.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, the other thing I look for is, did you have an experience as a kid that if it happened to your own child would make you sad or angry?
Hmm.
Because a lot of people, they look back at their childhood and they'll say, oh, it wasn't that bad, or
Right.
other people have been through worse than me. Um, and they just don't recognize the magnitude of the impact that it had on them until I ask them to imagine their own child or another child that they care about going through the same thing. Is there anything that happened to you that you would really not want to have happen to your own child, that you would avoid in your own parenting? And you see people's facial expressions change dramatically when I ask that question,
Hmm.
because all of a sudden it's not them anymore. It's somebody else that they care about. And they're like, oh, well. And they start telling me about um, all kinds of different things that might have happened to them. One of the patients, this was fairly subtle. It took him a while to come up with this, to remember this. But he said the only time he got praise from his parents was when he did something better than his brothers and sisters could do it.
Mm.
And he had three very accomplished siblings. So
Right.
he almost never was able to get, positive support
Right.
from his parents. It had a terrible impact on his self-esteem. And he was now, when I saw him, in his late 30s, successful attorney, but had all kinds of problems in his personal life and all kinds of physical symptoms that just seemed to be coming from nowhere. And so we had a conversation about the long-term impact of being mistreated as a kid and the kinds of things we can do to successfully overcome that. But these
Yeah.
are these are strong people. These are not people who are weak. These are not people who are just can't handle their own stress. They're actually mentally stronger than average. They're kind of like, I think of them like Olympic weightlifters who've been asked to carry 50 pounds more than the world record for their weight
Hmm.
class.
Hmm.
Anybody is going to feel weak trying to do that.
For
Anybody's
sure.
body is going to break down trying to do that.
For sure.
But once they learn how to put that weight of stress down, then they realize how strong they've been all along.
That's such a good visual. So what does it look like to help them set that stress down? How does that work for us?
Well, I like to start out with people recognizing, the reality of what they went through as kids and to imagine a kid of their own going through it. And that helps people recognize, that they showed a lot of heroic
Mm.
perseverance in coming through those experiences. And I want them to think of themselves in those terms, that they are actually, very strong, that they had to endure a lot growing up, and they should be incredibly proud of themselves for having overcome all of that. Because once you can internalize that pride, it gives you tremendous support for doing other things, for making other changes in your life.
For
For
sure.
example, uh, putting yourself on the list of people you take care of. A lot of my patients don't do that. They grew
Mm.
up having to fix problems in their household, and now that they're doing the same thing, they're fixing problems in the workplace or in their family or with their spouse or with their neighbors or people they interact with socially. And you ask them, do they ever do anything for themselves? Do they ever take time for their own joy? And they're kind of like not really there.
Right.
They're all sort of on a treadmill that they never step off. And sooner or later, your body is going to force you to step off,
100%.
whether it's chronic fatigue or chronic pain. Um, it's going to protest. It's trying to send you a message with these symptoms that it's not happy about something.
Right.
And it's my job to try to figure out what they're not happy about.
Yeah, I love that. I don't know if you've ever read the book No Bad Parts. It's about parts integration, but I feel like this is kind of what we're talking about here is recognizing like this part of you that went through this thing, like how it served you and how it got you through it. And like let's integrate it with this part of you now that's living this part of your life. Like I feel like there's some parts integration here that happens to be able to overcome that
Yeah,
experience.
absolutely. A lot of this is learning, that people have learned fundamental assumptions about themselves that are not true.
Right.
They may have learned that it's their job in life to take care of everybody else in their world. They may have learned that they're not as good as other people, or that they're second rate, or even that they're worthless in some cases. That's one of the huge long-term impacts of almost any kind of abuse of a child is it makes them feel like they are unworthy. And
Mm-hmm.
when you learn that at such a young age, you carry it with you, and you try to compensate for it by being perfect, by being devoted to the needs of others, by being incredibly good as a person. And nobody can sustain that indefinitely.
Yep.
And if you're not aware that you're doing this because it's just the way you've always been,
Yep.
then the only way your brain has to let you know that it's unhappy with this is to start creating physical symptoms in your body.
That's it. Yeah. We talk a lot about on the show. I did a series earlier this year. I think it was this year, talking all about worthiness and unraveling the worthiness wound and how that affects us on a physical level, an emotional level, energetic level. But that the worthiness piece is such, especially for the women listening here. Like everyone listening here is, they're a high achieving woman, and that worthiness wound goes so deep. And it doesn't even have to be like big T trauma that caused this worthiness wound. It's
That's
just like
exactly right.
societal conditioning, and especially for women. And I think it's so sneaky and tricky because I think a lot of women aren't maybe, some of them maybe, not, but a lot of them I feel like aren't explicitly saying, like, I'm not worthy. But it's like these, like you were just talking about, it's taking care of everybody else, but not yourself. It's like these little sneaky things that is really underlying what it is.
Yeah, it took me a long time as a young doctor to learn that it doesn't have to be a big T trauma, that it
Mm-hmm.
can be anything that sends the message that you're not good enough.
That's it.
And how do people get insight into that if it was laid down as an assumption at such a young age that you've always had it in your mind about as a fact about who you are? And
Yep.
I come back to this exercise of imagining yourself a butterfly on the wall of your childhood home, and you're watching a kid you care about try to cope with everything that's going on there. And as you're thinking about that thought experiment, you can start to appreciate that, you know what, you had to overcome a lot more than you think.
Right.
And you can respect the little kid that had to
Yes.
deal with that.
Yep.
One of my patients was just insisting up and down that her childhood was really not that bad. And what it was her parents would verbally and emotionally abuse each other all day long. She was
Mm.
the only kid in the family, and she took on the role of trying to be peacemaker. And
Mm.
of course, as a child, she didn't succeed very often. And she just felt terrible about herself because she was failing to solve this problem over and over and over again. She became a perfectionist. She was extremely self-critical. She was constantly focused on other people. And when I was saying, I think that this childhood experience you had must have had a major impact on you. And she's saying, no, it really wasn't that bad. Until I asked her to imagine her favorite niece, who was about 5 or 6 years old at the time, and said, all right, we're going to put your niece in that environment, and we're going to put you in there as a butterfly on the wall, and you're going to watch your niece try to cope with your parents for a week or 10 days or so. What's that going to be like for you? And she just stared at me. She was very accomplished, very, verbally skilled person, and, very able to speak and express herself. Didn't say a word, just stared at me
Mm.
for a couple of minutes. And then finally at the end, she said, after a week of that, I would shoot myself.
Oh, man.
And that was the first time she realized just how significant the impact had been.
Yeah.
And so I tried to help her feel like, look, you didn't go through that for a week. You went through it for, close to
Many
1,000 weeks
years.
of that. You need to be incredibly proud of yourself, as if you had parachuted into the Himalayas as a toddler and somehow found your way out. You need to give yourself tremendous credit, which will then lead to your giving yourself some self-care time every week, and to not having close personal relationships with people who have problems, or who are narcissists, who constantly need so much of your support that your relationships are unbalanced. She had a new boyfriend about every 12 to 18 months for close to 20 years. And they were all bad
Mm.
in their own ways. They all had problems. They all had things that she was trying to fix and give them support. And,
Yep.
I think probably in your audience, there are going to be people who have this same issue. Once you recognize your own heroism, um, the kinds of people you end up forming relationships with are completely different.
Mm.
You're able to, once you respect yourself, you're going to insist on that from a person who's close to you in a romantic relationship.
Right.
You're not going to tolerate somebody who needs 95% of your energy and only gives 5%
That's
back.
it. That's it. Yeah, because at that point I mean, it goes back to the worthiness piece. You see what you actually are worthy of, and it's not taking care of other people's problems. So yeah, I love that. I love that. Those are such valuable stories. I think a lot of women can relate to what you just shared. So with this, after this, kind of meeting this part of you that experienced this thing and recognizing, the heroism, what would be like next step for kind of rewiring the rest of that and kind of reworking the what's going on in the
Yeah.
brain?
Well, I should point out that for anybody who's watching, that if they want to screen themselves for any of these issues, there's a 12-item self-questionnaire on symptomatic.me. It takes less than 3 minutes, and will give people a lot of insight into whether some of these issues are for active in their lives.
Yeah,
So
perfect.
that's a good place to start. Once we've identified what some of these issues are, then there's a lot of different forms of treatment. We haven't talked about some of the other long-term impacts. We've talked about stressful personality traits, which can be changed if you know where they came from and that they came from an unhealthy place. But another one is triggers, which are people, situations, or events that are highly stressful for you because they are in some way linked to episodes from the past.
Mm,
A common one is that patient who was hospitalized 60 times at a prestigious university for these attacks of severe dizziness and vomiting. They were all triggered by direct or indirect interactions with her abusive mother.
oh wow.
And she didn't see it.
Yeah.
It was only because I knew to look for that kind of thing, and I was able to show her that this was connected. And once she saw it, I can still remember she looked up at the ceiling and said, "Oh my God, I can't believe it."
Mm,
And being able then to see the trigger means you can put boundaries around it.
right.
And she definitely put some strong boundaries around her mother after that, never had another attack. And then the last one, and the most difficult, are the emotions. Negative emotions: fear, anger, shame, grief, guilt. I have seen them all cause physical symptoms in the body.
100%.
One of them actually completely paralyzed my patient's stomach, not the abdomen, but the organ of digestion.
Yeah.
So it's these emotions are quite powerful, but they may not reach the level of conscious awareness. People can be, for example, tremendously angry, especially at somebody they care about, and not have conscious awareness of it.
For sure.
But if I can help people become consciously aware, and that butterfly on the wall thought experiment is very useful there, then they can start trying to put those emotions into words. And a common exercise that I have people do is write a letter to the person or people who mistreated them, not to mail it, just to write it, put all those emotions onto a piece of paper or onto a computer screen. And the more those emotions are put into words, the less they're going to go into the body and cause symptoms.
Yeah, just getting them out. That's it. You just got to feel them and get them out. Yeah,
Yeah, or it can be spoken to a
right.
therapist or one of my patients, a 16-year-old boy. English was his second language. He didn't write very well, so he spoke into a recording device and put his
Mm,
emotions out that way. All of his symptoms had been triggered when he tried to reconcile with his father, and it didn't go well at all. In fact, it went
mm,
very badly. His father rejected him, and he
mm.
was just outraged. But he had no conscious awareness of how outraged he was.
Right.
So it all just went into his stomach.
Man. Yeah, I think we talk a lot about emotions on this show. It's part of the work that I do, but I think that is, and you just painted the picture so perfectly there, because I think that sometimes thinking about like emotions causing physical symptoms can be like this like abstract thing or this like esoteric thing, like, oh, emotions are this, or you've seen people might even see it as woo, but like this is an actual like there, and there's a lot of science to back this up, but like this is a thing. Like this is a thing that's
Oh, yeah,
causing.
this is a huge thing. And we
Yeah.
do have the research now. The symptomatic.me website has a bibliography of research papers with over 200 references on it. Each one is described in plain English if people want to get into that research. But
Yeah.
one of the big ones was called the Boulder Back Pain Study. Just to give you an example, they
Mm.
took 150 people who had back pain for an average of 10 years. They randomly divided them into three groups. One group got just their usual treatment. Another group got a big injection into the spine. And the third group got one of the new neuroplastic recovery therapies that we're using now to help people with these brain to body, mind to body symptoms. All they got was 2 sessions a week for 4 weeks, and their pain scores plummeted by 75%. And this
Wow.
is after 10 years. You have to imagine
Yeah.
10 years long of this chronic low back pain. The other two groups, even the injection group, maybe 5 or 10% improvement, but 75% from exactly the kinds of ideas that we've been talking about for the last half an hour.
Yeah.
And it was sustained. They followed them up for a year to see if the pain would come back, not in the
Wow.
neuroplastic group.
That's even more impressive that
Yeah.
they could keep it away. That's incredible.
The guy who did the research is now following up after 5 years because this was published in 2021,
Hmm.
and the pain scores are still down.
That's crazy. I mean, that's a lot of evidence right there to
And it's been corroborated. There are studies now from Harvard, from UCLA, from Detroit, from Halifax. They're all showing the same thing. When we get into the emotions and into stress and into trauma, um, we are alleviating this brain to body. That was the other piece from the Boulder back pain study. They scanned all their brains and they saw physical changes in the brain just from 8 sessions of neuroplastic recovery
that's
therapy. It was
crazy.
astounding. It got
Yeah.
national publicity.
Yeah, yeah, that's incredible. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, we touched on this before we were recording, because I know this is a really common story that a lot of the women listening have, but we've talked a lot about, or we do talk a lot on the show about, finding ourselves and, understanding our unique design and how we operate and what we're really here to do. And we talk a lot about deconditioning and, pulling apart these pieces that we've taken on as shoulds that aren't a part of our design. And we were mentioning before we hit record that there's this piece of when we become disconnected from ourselves and how this relates to chronic pain. And I wonder if you could just speak on that and your experience with that.
Yeah, if you learned assumptions about who you are when you were growing up that are not true, that's going to completely distort how you live your life today. We mentioned this earlier. We touched on it earlier. If you learned that it's your job to solve the problems for everyone else in the world, if you learn that you need to be perfect, the drive that you're going to have, it's very good for a lot of things. I mean, it's good for your career. It's good for everybody else in your life. But you're not putting yourself on the list of people you take care of. You are basing your choices on ideas about yourself that are not true, you're going to end up with being on a treadmill that you never step off. And the only thing that will get you off that treadmill and finally get you to pay attention to yourself is when your brain causes physical pain or exhaustion or other forms of illness in your body. I mean, it can literally go from head to toe. I've had patients with dizziness, I mentioned, ringing in the ears, visual disturbances, lump in the throat, mandibular joint problems, migraines, long COVID, irritable bowel, fibromyalgia, functional nerve disorders, pelvic pain, genital pain, joint pain, the chronic fatigue, the certain kinds of rashes. I mean, the something that your brain is doing to try to send you a message that the way you're living your life is causing problems.
Mm,
But fortunately, again, if we can uncover the underlying issues, um, all of this can be successfully treated,
yeah.
even after decades, even in people whose symptoms were severe enough to put them in the hospital.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to call out there. A lot of times people think it's too late. It's too late for me. But yeah, I mean, this is proving otherwise. So I think that's really it gives people a lot of hope. So thank
Yeah.
you for
Oh,
sharing
one of
that.
my patients was, ill for 79 years.
Oh my gosh.
Another one I was asked to see, she was a 17-year-old girl. She was in the hospital for 70 days when I was asked to see
Oh,
her. She was
wow.
getting morphine in massive doses
Oh
around the
gosh.
clock. And she had already seen 6 gastrointestinal specialists, which is what I am. Um, but it all was connected to a significant stress in her life. It wasn't a stress caused by abuse. It was really a stress caused by some outside factors in the family that everybody in the family tried to cope with as best they could, but it resulted in a tremendous amount of pressure on her and eventually led to these physical symptoms. But by understanding the dynamics in the family, it was fairly straightforward to make some changes. And within a week, she was off the morphine infusions and onto tablets and was out of the hospital. 3 weeks after that, she was taking no pain medication at all.
That's crazy that it can happen that fast.
Yeah, it was a wonderful case
Yeah.
to see how quickly she turned it around.
Yeah.
Even the gentleman with the completely paralyzed stomach, once we uncovered, and it took a while because he wasn't able to put it into words, but once
Mm.
we uncovered the fear that he had in his life and helped him to cope with that more successfully, he was fine.
That's crazy. I think this is, if anything, I hope this episode, everybody listening, this episode is giving you some hope because A, it's never too late, and B, it doesn't have to take forever. I think that's the other thing people, it's like, getting on the healing journey, like, oh, it's going to take forever, but it doesn't have to take forever. So that's
No, I mean,
really
some
hopeful.
people, they're going to need several years of,
Sure.
neuroplastic recovery psychotherapy
Sure.
to get these kinds of outcomes. But even those patients, they can see, number one, that they've got a real diagnosis, that there's
Right.
nothing fake about this. It's
Yeah.
just as real as any other diagnosis I made in my practice. And number two, that it's treatable. To finally have a name to put on this is a great source of relief for people that, a doctor
Yeah.
actually knows what's wrong
Yep.
and that there's a pathway toward healing. Even if it's going to take a few years, my patients are okay with that.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a better an improvement from the alternative. So I think that, and I'm sure too, there's like little incremental improvements along the way. So it's not like you're waiting this whole few years for things to turn around.
Yeah, that's right. Well, there was a patient who came back to see me 4 or 5 years after I had made the diagnosis, and she still had symptoms. And
Hmm.
I asked her straight out, aren't you getting discouraged that you've still got this? And she said, not at all, because before I saw you, I was in the hospital at least once a year.
Mm,
And
there
she
you
hadn't
go.
been in the hospital at all. So she
Wow.
was very gratified
Yeah.
to see that even though she wasn't cured,
Right.
things were much better.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. For sure. This is so helpful. I think the other thing too, just kind of what we were saying earlier, I think this also gives people a lot of hope for what I was saying earlier, calling out, like when you think it's all in your head and you're saying, you, Dr. David, are saying, no, it's in your brain, it's not in your head. So I think that's sort of thing giving people hope that they're not making it up and it's not, yeah, these are real
Yeah,
things.
the Boulder back pain study absolutely found when they scanned people's brains that there were changes in there. And there
Hmm.
are other studies that have shown that you take people with these symptoms and scan their brains, their neuroanatomy, the way they process signals from the body, is different than it is for people who don't have these symptoms. So there is a real physiological, physical basis for this.
Yeah.
Nobody's making this up. It's not imaginary in the least. And the good news is it's treatable.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing such great information about this. I think that this is giving people, a lot of people listening to, giving them another avenue to go on their healing route. So thank you for that. And I have one more question I want to ask you, but before I ask you that, can you let everybody know where they can find out about everything that you're talking about and maybe diving into this for themselves?
Yeah, symptomatic.me. We've got a 12 question self-assessment quiz for starters, and then we've got all kinds of resources on there, courses, recorded conferences, books that we recommend because they're science-based. We've even got textbooks for professionals, but they're written without jargon. So anybody who's interested in the science can read those
Awesome.
textbooks and learn about that. We have an annual conference coming up in 2025 on September 28th to
Mm.
30th in Boulder, Colorado. Got lots of videos. We have monthly question and answer sessions online with experts for people who support us by becoming members. Lots and lots of resources on there.
Perfect. Perfect. So I will put that in the show notes, and there's a lot to check out there. So y'all go check that out. And the last question I want to ask you, Dr. David, what do you think is the most important thing you can do to live with purpose?
I think life is a journey of finding where your skills and the things you love to do um, make a fit with what the world needs.
Mm.
And, that's not something that you can, sit back and answer in 5 minutes. It's something that you answer every day of your life. And where my patients get distorted is they are uh, taught assumptions about themselves uh, at a very young age that are simply not true. And so they're trying to find their way to what they love and what they're good at and how that fits with the world based on these false assumptions. And typically that doesn't work very well. But
Mm.
if we can replace the false assumptions with an accurate concept of who you are, and very often in my patients, the learning the mental strength that it took to overcome the adversity in the past and being proud of yourself for what you've accomplished in that area, then that brings you to an accurate understanding of your own power. And from there, you can absolutely make better choices about how what you love and what you're good at is going to be a fit for what the world needs.
I love that. I love that answer. Thank you so much for that really beautiful answer and for spending time with us today and for giving us all some hope for things that we might be dealing with our bodies. So thank you.
Thank you, Hope, for helping us to get the word out.